Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Speak Smart podcast. We're doing something a little different today. We're taking a deep dive into the impact of war.
Yeah, we're using a really interesting podcast episode as our source material for this one.
And it's full of personal stories from people who've lived through war.
What I found really compelling is the way it combines those personal stories with analysis from experts. It's not just about the facts and figures,
Right.
the statistics.
Yeah.
It's about the human impact of conflict.
Exactly. Like you read headlines, but when you hear someone like Ahmed describing what it was like to lose his home and become a refugee as a child,
Yeah.
it just hits you so much harder, the human cost of war.
Ahmed's story is so powerful because it really highlights the challenges faced by so many people who are displaced, especially children. I mean, can you imagine being uprooted from everything you know, facing a dangerous journey,
Yeah.
and then ending up in a crowded refugee camp?
It's heartbreaking. And the source material doesn't shy away from the tough stuff either. It talks about the lack of food, the lack of clean water, the spread of diseases.
And think about the impact on education. Schools are often destroyed or closed during conflicts.
Yeah.
That's a huge setback for kids, for their futures. But even in those situations, there are these glimmers of hope.
Yeah.
The podcast tells this amazing story about Fatima, a teacher who continued to educate children in a refugee camp. Talk about resilience.
Wow. That's amazing. Makes you realize that even in the darkest times, people find ways to help each other, to give kids a chance.
It really speaks to the strength of the human spirit.
Totally.
But, we can't ignore the psychological scars that war leaves behind.
Right.
The podcast also shares John's story. He's a soldier who's struggling to readjust to civilian life after experiencing some really horrific things.
Yeah.
Trauma.
His story is a powerful example of the challenges of PTSD. And it's not just soldiers who are affected, right? Yeah. Civilians who live through the terror of war can be deeply traumatized too.
Absolutely. The source material goes beyond just describing PTSD symptoms. It talks about the importance of providing proper mental health support for both soldiers and civilians. I think that's a really important takeaway for everyone listening.
Couldn't agree more. It's a reminder that healing takes time and that it's okay to ask for help. We also need to talk about the unique challenges faced by women and girls during and after war.
Yes. The podcast does a good job of highlighting that. The increased responsibilities they face, the risks of violence,
Right.
and the need for specific support systems.
Yet, even in those incredibly difficult circumstances, there are women like Maria who rise up and help others. The podcast tells her story.
Yeah.
She started a support group in a refugee camp, empowering other women to rebuild their lives.
Wow. Inspiring.
Truly, it's a powerful example of leadership, resilience in the face of adversity.
That idea of community rebuilding is so important. The source material tells this incredible story about a European town that came together after World War II to clear the rubble and rebuild their lives.
Now, a whole town working together.
It just shows you the collective effort, the determination to rebuild after such devastating loss.
Amazing.
And that recovery process often involves help from outside.
Right.
The podcast highlights the essential work of organizations like the Red Cross, the UN, Doctors Without Borders, and Save the Children.
We hear those names all the time, but until you really hear about what they do, like the podcast talks about Doctors Without Borders setting up makeshift hospitals and active conflict zones.
That takes courage.
Incredible bravery. It's not just the big organizations, though, right?
No.
The source material talks about all these local initiatives, too. Like there's a story about Syrian women starting a bakery to provide food for their community. And an Afghan group offering vocational training to help people get back on their feet.
That's fantastic.
Those stories really highlight the power of grassroots efforts, the resilience of communities.
One story that really stayed with me was Emily's. She is a nurse who volunteered with Doctors Without Borders.
Wow.
Her story just shows you the impact that one person can have. It's a reminder that even small acts of kindness and compassion can make a huge difference.
So true.
And then there's the role of technology in war zones. That's something I hadn't really thought about before.
Yeah.
But the source material highlights some really innovative uses, like drones delivering medical supplies to remote areas and online resources offering education and mental health support to displaced people.
It's amazing how technology can be used for good in such challenging situations, bridging gaps and delivering aid more efficiently.
Absolutely. It's a powerful tool for good. But, responding to war's aftermath is only part of the story.
Right.
We need to think about how to prevent future conflicts.
Exactly. And the source material does a great job of explaining what that means. It emphasizes education, dialogue, political and economic reforms, and international cooperation. I found the example of South Africa's Truth and Reconciliation Commission really interesting.
Oh, that's a fascinating example, showing how forgiveness and reconciliation can heal deep societal wounds.
Powerful stuff.
It really highlights the human capacity for growth and change, even after incredible hardship.
And the podcast also talks about the UN's peacekeeping efforts, where personnel from all over the world are deployed to conflict zones to help maintain stability and protect civilians.
It's a great example of what international cooperation can achieve, that collective action can prevent and resolve conflicts.
It's a reminder that peace building isn't just the job of governments and organizations. We all have a part to play.
Absolutely.
I'm glad the podcast makes that point. It encourages listeners to think about their own contributions to peace.
Yeah. Like what?
Supporting peace-building organizations, engaging in dialogue, practicing tolerance in our daily lives, fostering a culture of peace.
It starts with each of us.
And the podcast even shares inspiring stories of individuals who are making a difference, like Amina, who started a peace club at her school to promote understanding among students from different backgrounds, and Carlos, who created a community center in a neighborhood affected by gang violence, offering a safe space for young people and addressing the root causes of the conflict.
That's so inspiring.
It really shows that even small actions can ripple outward and create positive change. We all have the power to be peace builders. But as we move forward, it's important to acknowledge that war has lasting effects.
Yes.
Both on individuals and on societies. The source material really digs into that, exploring the challenges of healing from trauma, rebuilding communities, dealing with the economic and social consequences of conflict.
Right. It's a reminder that the impact of war can last for generations.
And that recovery is a long and complex process.
Absolutely. And it highlights the need for long-term commitment and support for those affected by conflict long after the fighting has ended.
It's about recognizing that true peace is more than just the absence of violence.
Right.
It's about creating the conditions for individuals and communities to thrive.
Exactly. And that leads us to the idea of transitional justice, which the podcast explores in detail.
Yeah. Transitional justice is about addressing past human rights abuses and promoting accountability and reconciliation.
Right. And it involves a variety of mechanisms like trials, truth commissions, reparations, and institutional reforms, all aimed at addressing the legacies of violence and creating a more just and equitable society.
And the podcast uses some great examples to illustrate this, like the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, which held individuals accountable for war crimes, and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa,
right,
which provided a platform for victims to share their stories and for perpetrators to acknowledge their actions.
It's about acknowledging past injustices, holding perpetrators accountable. These are essential steps towards healing and building a more just future.
It's a powerful reminder that peace and justice go hand in hand, and that achieving lasting peace requires addressing the root causes of conflict, making sure that past wrongs are acknowledged and addressed.
Absolutely. It's a testament to the human capacity for growth, forgiveness, and transformation.
I think one of the most important things we've learned in this deep dive so far is that peace isn't passive.
Oh, no.
It's something we actively build and nurture.
It's a continuous process. It requires ongoing effort and commitment from individuals, communities, and nations.
It's about challenging injustice, promoting dialogue, creating a culture of peace in our everyday lives,
and believing that a better future is possible, even amidst the complexities and challenges we face.
Well said. This has been an incredibly insightful deep dive, and I hope our listeners are inspired to keep exploring this topic and to think about their own roles in building a more peaceful world.
I hope so too. We've only just scratched the surface, but this conversation has laid a good foundation for further exploration and action.
Absolutely. So to wrap things up, let me leave our listeners with a question. What one small act of peace can you commit to today? It could be reaching out to someone from a different background, donating to a humanitarian organization, or just reflecting on how you can promote understanding and tolerance in your own life.
Remember, those small actions can add up
to create real change.
Together, we can build a world where peace prevails, You know, it's amazing how those personal stories really stick with you.
I know, right?
They really bring home the scale of what people go through during war.
For sure. It's easy to get caught up in the big picture, the geopolitical stuff. But hearing those firsthand accounts, like Ahmed's story, Fada's story, it really makes you connect with the human reality of it all.
It makes you realize that even in the midst of all that destruction, there's this incredible resilience. The human spirit is amazing.
It really is.
Yeah.
Like they say, the human capacity for love and survival is just astonishing.
Yeah, and that's what the source material really highlights. It's not just about the devastation. It's about the incredible ways that people find ways to cope, adapt, and rebuild their lives.
Yeah. It's a reminder that even in the darkest times, there's always hope. Speaking of hope, I was really struck by how the podcast talked about the role of humanitarian aid. Those global efforts to provide relief and support.
Absolutely. The work that organizations like the Red Cross, Doctors Without Borders, and Save the Children are doing is essential. They're often the first ones on the ground, providing medical care, food, shelter, all those vital services to people who have lost everything.
It's really humbling to think about the risks they take working in those dangerous environments to help others.
Their dedication and bravery are truly inspiring, and it's not just the international organizations that are making a difference.
Right.
The source material also highlights the amazing work being done by local communities and volunteers.
Like those stories about the Syrian women who started a bakery to feed their neighbors.
Yes.
And the Afghan groups providing vocational training to help people rebuild their lives. It's so inspiring.
It really shows the power of community, that grassroots effort in responding to the impact of war.
It just shows you that even when things are incredibly tough, people find ways to support each other, to create that sense of hope, a sense of normalcy.
And it speaks to the importance of empowering those local communities to be part of the solution. One thing I found really interesting was how the podcast explored the role of technology in war zones.
Oh, yeah. That was a really fascinating perspective. It's not something you usually think about. But technology plays such a big role now, both in responding to conflicts and in helping with recovery.
Exactly. We're seeing things like drones being used to deliver medical supplies to places that are hard to reach, and online platforms that connect people with mental health services.
It's incredible how technology can be used for good. Like in those really tough situations, it really highlights the potential for coming up with creative solutions and for working together to address the complex issues that arise from war.
Absolutely. And as we move forward, it's important that we shift our focus from just reacting to the aftermath of war to actively working to prevent future conflicts.
And that's where peacebuilding comes in, right?
Exactly. And the source material does a fantastic job of breaking down what peacebuilding actually means. It emphasizes the need for this multifaceted approach that involves education, dialogue, political and economic reforms, and international cooperation.
So it's about addressing those root causes of conflict and creating the conditions for lasting peace.
Precisely.
Right.
And it's not just the responsibility of governments and organizations.
Right. Individuals have a huge role to play too.
Absolutely.
And I like how the podcast really stresses that. It encourages people to think about what they can do to contribute to peace.
Yeah, like what kind of things?
Things like supporting peace-building organizations, engaging in dialogue, practicing tolerance in your daily life, just fostering that culture of peace.
Starts with each of us.
Exactly.
Yeah.
One of the most powerful examples the podcast gave was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa.
Oh, that was such a powerful initiative.
It really demonstrated the power of forgiveness and reconciliation in healing those deep societal wounds.
It showed that even after decades of conflict and oppression, it's possible to create a path toward healing and unity.
A powerful reminder that change is possible, even in the toughest circumstances.
And it's a testament to human compassion and forgiveness. But peacebuilding isn't just about dealing with past conflicts.
Right.
It's about stopping them from happening in the first place. The podcast also talks about the importance of UN peacekeeping efforts.
Right.
Keeping things stable and protecting people in those active conflict zones.
It's a testament to the power of working together, international cooperation to solve these global challenges.
Absolutely. They show that when we join forces, we can make a real difference in preventing violence and promoting peace.
It's really inspiring to think about all those people from different countries and cultures coming together to work towards that common goal.
It's a reminder that even though we have our differences, we all share this desire for a more peaceful world.
And that brings us to a really important point. Peace building isn't just the responsibility of governments and big organizations. It's something that we can all contribute to.
Absolutely. That's one of the key takeaways from the source material. It encourages everyone to think about their role in fostering peace, starting with those everyday choices and actions.
It's about promoting understanding and tolerance, challenging injustice wherever you see it, speaking out against violence and advocating for peaceful solutions to conflict.
And recognizing that even small acts of kindness and compassion can make a difference.
Exactly. And the podcast shares some inspiring stories of individuals who are doing just that, making a real impact in their communities, starting peace clubs in schools, creating safe spaces for young people in neighborhoods that have been affected by violence.
It just shows you that anyone can be a peace builder, no matter who they are or what they do.
It's about recognizing that we all have a role to play in creating a more peaceful world.
And believing that a better future is possible if we work together to make it happen. But as we dig deeper into this topic, it's important to acknowledge that war has long-lasting effects, both on individuals and on societies.
Right. The source material doesn't shy away from that.
No.
It explores the challenges of healing from trauma, rebuilding communities, dealing with the economic and social consequences of all that conflict.
It's a reminder that the impact of war can last for generations, and that recovering from it is a long and complex process.
It highlights the need for ongoing support and resources for those affected by conflict, long after the fighting has stopped.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that true peace isn't just about stopping the violence. It's about creating conditions that allow individuals and communities to truly thrive.
Absolutely. And that brings us to this really crucial concept of transitional justice, which the podcast spends some time unpacking.
Right. Transitional justice is about dealing with those past human rights abuses, promoting accountability and reconciliation after conflict.
It involves a whole range of mechanisms, from trials and truth commissions to reparations and reforms, all aimed at addressing the impact of that violence and trying to create a more just and equitable society.
And the podcast uses some really good examples to illustrate this, like the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, which was about holding people accountable for war crimes, and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa, which gave victims a platform to share their stories and perpetrators a chance to own up to their actions.
Powerful examples.
Those examples show that even after terrible violence, it's possible to work towards justice and accountability while also promoting healing and reconciliation.
It's a reminder that peace and justice are interconnected, and that achieving lasting peace means we have to deal with the root causes of the conflict and make sure that past wrongs are addressed. It really is a testament to the human capacity for growth, forgiveness, and transformation.
I think one of the biggest takeaways from this deep dive is that peace isn't just something that happens.
No.
It's something that we have to build and nurture.
Absolutely. It's an ongoing effort that needs commitment from individuals, communities, and entire nations.
It's about standing up to injustice, promoting dialogue, creating that culture of peace in our everyday lives,
and holding on to hope, even when faced with challenges.
and believing that a more peaceful world is possible, even amidst all the complexities that we face. You know, as we wrap up this deep dive, I can't help but think about how complex this all is, war and its impact. It's easy to feel a bit overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the challenges, you know.
Yeah, it's true. It is really complex. So many different factors involved. But what I find really inspiring is that even when faced with all of that, people are incredibly resilient. They find ways to adapt and overcome. I mean, look at the stories we've been discussing.
Right, exactly. Like Maria starting that support group in a refugee camp.
Yeah.
Or Emily volunteering as a nurse in a war zone. Those stories give me hope. They remind us that even in the darkest times, there's always light. There's always hope.
It's not always about those big heroic actions either. The podcast also highlights those everyday things people can do to build peace. Talking to each other, trying to understand different perspectives, speaking out against injustice. All those things matter.
Absolutely.
Those small actions can really add up and create real change. And it's empowering to know that we all have a role to play in creating a more peaceful world. It's not just up to governments and big organizations.
Right. It's about moving from that feeling of helplessness to a place of action. So what really stood out to you from this deep dive? I think for me, it's the power of personal stories. You know, hearing directly from people like Ahmed and Fatima and John, it makes the impact of war so much more real. It's not just an abstract concept anymore. It helps you connect with the human side of it all and build empathy.
Yeah, I agree. Those stories paint this incredibly vivid picture of what people go through, the resilience, the hope, the incredible strength of the human spirit. And they remind us that even after experiencing so much suffering, there's still that capacity for healing, forgiveness, rebuilding.
And those stories highlight the importance of transitional justice too, addressing past wrongs, holding people accountable, fostering reconciliation, like those examples we talked about, the International Criminal Tribunal and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. Those are really powerful examples of how to move forward after conflict.
They show that acknowledging past injustices is crucial, and holding perpetrators accountable. It's all part of healing and building a more just future.
It reminds us that peace isn't just the absence of war. It's this ongoing process, a commitment to creating something better.
And it's something that we can all be a part of, whether it's supporting organizations that are working for peace or having those tough conversations or just practicing empathy and tolerance in our daily lives.
It's about recognizing that we're all connected, that peace is everyone's responsibility.
And believing that a more peaceful world is possible, even with all the challenges we face.
So well said. This has been such an insightful deep dive, and I really hope our listeners are inspired to learn more about this and to think about what they can do to help build a more peaceful world.
Me too. We've only scratched the surface here. But this conversation has hopefully given everyone a good starting point to explore these ideas further and to take action.
For sure. So as we wrap up, I want to leave everyone with a question. What's one small thing you can do today to promote peace? It could be reaching out to someone from a different background, donating to an organization that's working in a conflict zone, or even just taking some time to reflect on how you can be more understanding and tolerant in your own life.
Remember, those small acts can create ripples of change, and together we can make a difference. We can create a world where peace wins.
Thank you for listening to the Speak Smart podcast.